Hello, Arun. How's it going? I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's everything is seems like good. Um, Planets are good, humans are good, and energy also good.
Yeah,
How do you feel about this today?
today's pretty good. Let
Mm-hmm.
me see what's going on right now in the sky above me. Uh, we've got Scorpio rising where I
Mm-hmm.
am, and Jupiter in the seventh house. K2 Sun, Mercury in the 11th, Venus in the 12th, Moons and MKS in the eighth. But that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good day to talk about transformation
Mm-hmm.
and spirituality. A good time to do that. So yeah.
So, how long you been in astrology?
Yeah, so I started studying Western astrology years ago. I actually started first do studying ritual,
Mm-hmm.
planetary ritual, and working
Mm-hmm.
with the different planetary uh, archangels and powers, and then doing astrological magic, talismans, and that kind of stuff, and Renaissance magic, Renaissance astrological magic, like the Picatrix.
Mm-hmm.
I studied with Christopher Warnock,
Mm-hmm.
who is a fantastic Renaissance astrologer, one of the best, probably the best.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it's only been a few years that I've been really going very deeply into Vedic astrology,
Mm-hmm.
studying in the Achyutananda Das tradition under Freedom Cole,
Mm-hmm.
and then his teacher is Sanjay Roth. So I'm taking
Mm-hmm.
some advanced classes. I'm doing the PJC with under the direction of Freedom, Sanjay's class.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the tradition I'm studying in, and everything that I know about Vedic astrology, I've learned from this tradition, and anything that I say that is incorrect is my own fault.
So, you have hands-on, you have an experience with the Western astrology as well as the Vedic system, which I am coming from. You have an experience with those two. So, how do you see, if I see in the Western astrology, which is something I can make out some important difference. Something there is no concept of stars. You understand that if you look into the Vedic astrology, there are concept of stars,
Nakshatras.
nakshatras exactly. And nakshatras
Yeah,
is the group of stars. So you alpha, beta. There
yeah.
is in the sky.
So
There
there
is a,
actually are there is that concept in Western astrology.
yeah. That's what I'm. There is no concept which
So you're
I.
breaking up a little bit.
Yeah. Am I okay now?
Well, there is actually. So there yeah. So there are the fixed stars that are
Mhm.
used a lot. So like there are mainly a few of them that are used, like Alcade and Aldebaran and Spica and so on. They have Arabic names, and then we also do have lunar mansions,
Mhm.
which in the tradition that I studied when in the Western is more traditional Renaissance and Middle Ages
Mhm.
astrology.
Mhm.
And so they do use it's a lot of Arabic astrology, and they do use lunar mansions, but they're not tied, which are nakshatras, but they're not tied to the stars because
Mhm.
they're tropical lunar mansions. But there are still
The
fixed stars, which are
in the
but
Vedic
not
astrology.
at
I would love to pursue somewhere there, like because in the Vedic astrology also, when we look into the sky, nakshatra is actually a group of stars. It's a constellation, something similar to. I'm not so good. I'm not able to understand what is this there in the Arabic astrology or things like that. I am really not so sure what we are trying to talk over here. But the thing is, if you look into the Vedic astrology, the
yeah
stars are the group of nakshatras are the group of stars basically.
yeah the constellations. Yeah,
Hmm.
definitely, and that's one of the things I like about Vedic astrology too. It's very focused on what's actually in the sky.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, whereas the tropical zodiac is based on the equinoxes and solstices,
Hmm.
so it's less about the actual constellations and more about, um, the point where the sun the sun and moon are equal in terms of the seasons. Um, So they both have their pluses and minuses, in my opinion.
Yeah,
But
but still, there is some truth is hidden in both versions, even
yeah,
though. So,
yeah,
as a truth seeker, I'm trying to see whether, like, whatever truth which comes into the understanding of my understanding and the way which I experience the same thing. So I'm a kind of trying to seek a truth here, whether it is Western astrology, whether it is Indian astrology. So where does it meet? Even though, like, even maybe we are different in color, but under the hood, we are all human beings. So you see, there will be
yeah,
something which is uniting all of us together in some place or another. Like, maybe it may not be the language, may not be the color, may not be the shape, may not be whatever, but there is something which unify us as a human being under the hood, and whatever the wellness sciences which we developed, irrespective of whether it is in from west or whether it is from India or south, there might be some truth. So if we try to do a dialect in that sense, maybe we will be able to see some truth which is hidden in, which is actually hidden in the
yeah,
irrespective of the system which we follow, like,
yeah. And so the way I usually see it is that uh, 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 astrological systems are like languages.
Mhm,
So you can talk about the same dog in English or in Hindi or in Japanese, and you're all describing the same object,
mhm,
in consciousness, the
mhm,
dog. Um, but to write a poem about that dog,
mhm,
it's not going to be perfectly translatable
mhm,
into the different languages because there's all these different nuances to each language. And that's kind of how I see the different astrological systems. The planets are still in the same place in the sky,
mhm, mhm,
but it depends on how we the divvy up the describing those planets. And I find that they're like different systems are better for different things too. And one of the reasons that I'm studying the Vedic tradition that I'm studying, and especially this particular tradition, is that it's very good at seeing what is
mhm,
and seeing where there are problems and then
mhm,
remedying those problems. So
mhm,
that's one of the so and then again with language, like language both reveals and obscures. Like
mhm,
in a way, every sentence that you say is a lie
mhm,
because the
mhm.
truth is not able to be articulated in words. Of
Mhm.
understanding is based on this intellectual understanding with which is not you're not the real truth is not possible to apprehend with the mind.
This thing I can actually, what I found out is, like, in the way of relativity also we can say the same thing. Like, every object in this particular planet or the particular plane of existence is movable with the respect to time, which means that time is,
Mm,
if we think time as an axis of x, the every object is moving in that particular axis, whether it is displacing in the y-axis. Maybe that y-axis we can consider it as the plane place or the space where this particular thing is containing. So if I move from here to here, I'm moving in the plane of space. But even though if I'm moving from here, even if I'm not moving from here to there also, it is actually moving through the axis of time. So what is happening here, whatever we say is already been went into the axis of time because it's become past, and whatever existing in the past is actually untrue. So when we speak something in the words will be become untrue in the next moment, because that particular word will make sense in that particular moment only, you see. So this is something which I have understood, the way which you told. This is something which I can easily relate to,
yeah, yeah. Like there's that saying, especially in like pop
Mhm,
spirituality in the U.S.
Mhm.
to be in the now, to be in the moment. And it's not, it's kind of like in one way the moment doesn't exist because as soon as you experience a moment, it's already passed. In
Mhm.
another way, everything is the moment. But yeah, I get what you're saying. That's a strong insight, I think.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So, so also in the Vedic astrology, like, so, Vedic astrology, we have a system of giving remedies, and also when it
Yeah.
comes to the spiritual experiences, like, see, here I'm trying to make a dialect actually. Like, I am also coming from a background of the spirituality and the astrology actually. Like, I also practice the Vedic astrology, and I'm coming from that particular. I'm practicing it from many years now. So in this thing, I can see the remedies. And how do you relate your like, when we talk about something which is giving a profound spiritual experiences, that might be having a truth behind it, like, how do you feel,
Mhm.
like, I think you also come across the remedies. Maybe you could have tried something, or maybe you could have given something, you know is there something like that has been happened, or how do you see this particular stuff, like,
Yeah. So this is another reason that I've started studying in this tradition, and I've been studying this, in this tradition is to there are more tools for seeing spiritual experiences for and for working on that level than in the Western astrological toolkit. Um, and in a certain way, like when we talk about spirituality too, like there's a lot of different things that are called spirituality,
Mhm.
you know? Um, and my main interest has been in enlightenment in terms of like the realization of the essence
Mhm.
of of being,
Mhm.
and so that's what I've been mainly more focused on. Like my spiritual teachers, um, they're like they focus on that self inquiry and
Mhm.
self realization, and so that's what I see as like for me that's the highest spirituality. There's also working with various spirits, magic, like cities, powers, like these kind of things are also they're in a one way they're spiritual, but in I think in the more essential meaning of spirituality, they're not really spiritual. There's more phenomenon. Um,
So, like,
um,
I would love to, how do I see this particular thing? Like, for example, in spirituality doesn't come naturally. You need a practice or a guide in that particular path. You need a particular
yeah,
practice which helps you
yeah,
to go in that particular path. Either it is in the self inquiry, like the Ramana Maharshi, who is
yeah,
from the South India, he is asking, like, who am I? Maybe this is one particular practice, or some deity worship, or those things. One particular practice is needed. So certainly what happens, this particular practice will elevate you from one smaller place to another particular plane. So naturally you develop siddhi. There is
yeah,
nothing, I mean, if it is a technology, there is siddhi will be developed actually. Like, it will come if you are in a particular
yeah.
path, y- you know
Right. So what I've been doing is I've been studying the charts of people who I consider to be spiritually enlightened or at a higher point that I am that
Mhm.
in a place that I want to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I've been looking at their charts and seeing where the similarities are, looking at like Parashara Shastra and seeing what are the classical indications of enlightenment, moksha, spirituality, and seeing, do these people have these yogas? Do these
Mhm.
people have these indications, like Ketu in the 12th of the Karakamsha, in
Mhm.
the Amakark in the Navamsha, these kind of things, and seeing how that actually uh, lines up. Um, and I've found some interesting things too, because also in the people in my, I'm in America. The people that I interact with are mostly Americans. Um, and there's, I think every culture kind of has a different angle to their spirituality too.
Mhm.
But I've come across a lot of people who have not really focused as much on bhakti, but have focused more on this self-inquiry and inquiry in general. And some of them, some people seem to just, walk off of a bus
Mhm.
and suddenly are enlightened,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
who knows what happens it happened in their past lives.
Mhm.
Um, but some people like have spent their entire life working and
Mhm.
meditating very hard. And are they
Mhm.
doing the right practices? Like, how do you know what
Mhm.
the right practices are to do? So that's another thing I'm trying to see in the chart. Like, um, because you can see like what kind of meditation would be better for them, and also
Mhm.
what kind of meditation. Like, are they more of a bhakti path? Are they more of a gnani path? Or
Mhm.
so that's kind of like where my area of interest is right now. It's what I'm
Mhm. Mhm.
looking into.
Mhm.
And we can look at some charts if you'd like to, because I've got some charts and I've been.
Mhm.
Would you like to?
Um, yeah, like what makes you to think a particular chart, whether it is Bhakti or whether it is Gyani or like, that would be an interesting discussion basically.
Okay. I mean, if you let me share the screen, I have several charts that I
Yeah,
can you
you
can look
could
at if you'd like
share
to. I
the
can
screen.
show some of the techniques that I've been looking at.
Um, how do I make you make host? Hello. Yeah, yeah, I think you can share
But I
now.
also, yeah, like, so everyone's also got their own perspective. And one of the things that I see too is
Mhm.
um like a lot of the people who I see as who have had some real enlightenment, some real realization of truth. One of the things that they say often
Mhm.
is that nothing that you do makes you deserve it. Nothing that you do
Mhm.
makes it happen. But at the
Mhm.
same time, most of the people seen who have found something real have worked most their entire life towards it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a paradox, because I think that ultimately it's grace,
Uh,
right? And it's nothing the
I
personality does. It's the higher self that.
I didn't understood what was that like,
Yeah.
what you're trying to say there, like.
So I think ultimately what makes spiritual realization happen is not anything that the individual person does.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, it's not any particular meditation practice. It's not any particular bhakti practice.
Mhm.
It's something that happens on a higher level, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
And this is a lot of something that a lot of people say is that nothing that you can do will make you realized,
Mhm.
because it's not something that's happening on this plane. It's something that's happening on a higher level.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, most of the people who I've seen who have had some major experiences
Mhm.
have been working most of their life towards it. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like complicated as to like, are any of the practices that you're doing actually causing enlightenment? I don't know if anything causes enlightenment. You know,
Mhm.
they may cause city, they may
Mhm.
cause you know psychic power, they may cause all these kind of things, but I don't know if anything causes enlightenment. But that's one of the things I'm looking at too, is looking at the timing. So
Mhm.
like when enlightenment happens, and
Mhm.
in the transits at that time too. So
Mhm.
let's look at um well, Ramana Maharshi, for instance. So
Mhm.
so we've got Ramana Maharshi. He has one of the classic indications of enlightenment. He has K2 12th
Mhm.
from his Atmakarika in the D9.
Mhm. You
And that
been to
that's
Tiruvannamalai sometime? Like, Ramana Maharshi's place is Tiruvannamalai, which is in Tamil Nadu, where he born actually, who taught the self-inquiry to the people. And it is a magical place where the energy of that particular mountain is so intense, where that can elevate the people from really, from the subtle level to really higher. I mean, this is how I feel, but I never been to America. I don't know what happens in America, you see. But
Yeah, well, I think that Americans are often a lot more individualistic
Mhm.
in one way, and then also much more like bootstraps. So like I have a friend who was born in India, who came to America when she was in grad school,
Mhm.
and she was searching her entire life, but it wasn't until that she met some folks who really
Mhm.
like encouraged her that it's possible for her in this lifetime to realize the truth, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because, she's not a Brahmin, she's
Mhm.
a woman. She's,
Mhm.
like these are the kind of things that and so she doesn't even have some of the indications in the chart, but she does have a very strong Venus in
Mhm.
the D20, which
Mhm.
indicates very strong bhakti,
Mhm.
but also some indications for inquiry.
Mhm.
And and yeah, doing the inquiry and realizing that this is something that can happen, kind
Mhm.
of, and that you have to it's the paradox of like you have to put effort into it, but
Mhm.
it also is out of your hands,
Mhm.
you know. So
Mhm.
she eventually did have a realization.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I think it's like also different for every person. So for her, coming into a place where like the inquiry was emphasized, and then having
Mhm.
faith in that is what led to it. But again, it's hard to see like what actually, if it's if anything leads to it, or so that's what I'm
Mhm.
trying to
Mhm.
understand,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
um yeah, but so with Ramana Maharshi, he has that is one of the main indications.
Mhm.
Also, one thing that I've seen for people in general who are spiritual.
Ketu in the 11th house. That is what you are you are observing, right?
Okay, yes. So what I'm observing is, so do you know the concept of the Atmakarka?
Is the planet which has the. I mean,
Highest degree.
I'm a Vedic
Yeah.
astrologer basically. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, right. So in the I know there are also a lot of different traditions, and
yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
some traditions don't use the Amakarka, some do.
Exactly. Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
so what in my tradition, we look at the Amakarka in the D9 in the
Mm-hmm.
Navamsha,
Mm-hmm.
and we see what planet is 12th from that Amakarka. So for Ramana Maharshi, that's Ketu in
Mm-hmm.
Taurus. That's
Mm-hmm.
12th from the Amakarka.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows that planet represents the Ishta Devata. And in my
Mm-hmm.
tradition, Ishta Devata isn't just your chosen deity. It's not just the deity you like. It's the deity that helps you towards liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what in a Western context I would call that like a holy guardian angel in a
Mm-hmm.
certain way. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's concept that's similar, but like it's the deity that's helping the soul gain liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So um, in Bharat Prashahura Shastra, one of the
Mm-hmm.
indications for moksha or enlightenment is to have Ketu 12th from the Amakarka in the
Mm-hmm.
D9.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's classic. And of the people that I looked at 14 charts of people who have, in my opinion, found enlightenment,
Mm-hmm.
and um, 9 of them are living,
Mm-hmm.
and then 5 of them are you know like Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta,
Mm-hmm.
some other people,
Mm-hmm.
and half of them had
Mm-hmm.
K2 as Ishtadevata, were
Mm-hmm.
associated with the 12th from the Amakarka, but not
Mm-hmm.
everyone did. And then half of them had Tapasvi yogas,
Mm-hmm.
which indicate the capability to have very strong spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
And not very many of them had sadhu yogas. Not very many of them had yogas indicating being an ascetic. But of course, that makes sense because none of them are ascetics. Most of them are householders.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Ramana Maharshi
Yeah.
was, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the other people that I have here were
Yeah,
householders.
Nisargadatta had a household actually. Nisargadatta.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's look at his chart. And so he's got this really strong Sun, Venus, Mercury rising in Aries. So he's got an exalted Sun rising,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so his Amakarka is Venus. And
Mm-hmm.
another thing that we see oftentimes for people who have very strong spiritualities is if the Amakarka is either the sun or is
Mm-hmm.
associated with the sun
Mm-hmm.
and associated with the ascendant. So
Mm-hmm.
like the connection of the Lagnesha, the Amakarka, and the sun, and also Jupiter
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm.
That's like shows somebody with a very strong spirituality. And so for him, we have the sun in the ascendant conjunct the Amakarka with Jupiter aspecting. So that's like,
Mm-hmm.
like very closely, that shows spirituality, it's a
Mm-hmm.
very strong spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, he has Saturn 12th from
Mm-hmm.
the Amakarka in the D9. So that's
Mm-hmm.
not K2. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but again, only half of the people that I saw, but he has these other indications, you know?
Mhm.
And so we have some of these things. I looked at dashas for this too. So I was looking at Mula Dasha actually worked pretty well too.
Mhm.
So he renounced in Saturn Mercury, and that I was often finding there's like Saturn for him is a planet that indicates death,
Mhm.
you know, because it's in the eighth house. It's the most malefic planet. Um, and so I was finding this too, that for enlightenment experiences, often uh, Marikas were being triggered.
Mhm.
So like
Mhm.
planets that indicate death were being triggered because it's a death experience as well,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then here, this person also, this he had some of the most interesting combinations. This is a person who's living still, and this is a person who never consciously was doing spiritual practice in his life,
Mhm. Mhm.
but he did a lot of philosophical inquiry.
Mhm.
And then at a certain point, he was just curiously inquiring into what it meant to be human. And he
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
driving a lot. He drove a truck.
Mhm.
Drove a truck. And during about a year, he had a series of realizations that
Mhm.
ended up with like the self realization.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he was somebody who was born into a family where there was a lot of esoteric,
Mhm.
spiritual stuff going on, but he kind of
Mhm.
rebelled against that and went more into like other kinds of philosophy. But
Mhm.
he has K2 rising, and K2 is the karaka of liberation. You know, it
Mhm.
also is the karaka of trucks.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And it shows very strong intuition. His fifth lord is also in the fifth house, showing a very strong intuition. And
Mhm.
Saturn and Venus and Ketu in trines, that's one of the Tapasvi yogas. So it shows a capability for strong spiritual practice.
Mhm.
Probably was doing this in a past life. He was probably a monk in a past life.
Mhm.
Uh, and he has actually a Tapasvi yoga in the D1,
Mhm.
the D9 as well, and in
Mhm.
the D20. And the D20 is a really interesting chart for looking at spirituality. Too.
Mhm.
Do you use the D20?
I come up to D9, like more than that, I don't go. Like basically, up to D9, we will be able to figure out what is actually going on. And if some certain cases, like people are not that much interested into go to D9, D20, D21, D22, up to like, it's very,
Yeah.
very short cases. Like, I mean, generally people don't ask up to D20. Up to D9, we will
Okay.
be able to calculate most of the things what is happening in their life, like,
Yeah. So in the tradition that I study in, Sanjay Roth,
Mhm.
um, he emphasizes the divisional charts pretty extensively. I think he's one of
Mhm.
the traditions that focuses more on them. But we use the D20 for spiritual path. You know,
Mhm.
and in this chart, um, we see the moon
Mhm.
debilitated in the first house, and
Mhm.
debilitated planets in the D20 are actually a good thing
Mhm.
because that shows humility and humbleness.
Mhm. Mhm.
So this is a very humble person. And then the ascendant lord is going to the 12th house. So this shows like
Mhm.
a natural movement to uh, samadhi for
Mhm.
him because the
Mhm.
12th
Mhm.
house in the D20 is that kind of formless meditation.
Mhm.
You know, and there's a lot of other things in here too. But he also has um, Venus, Saturn, and K2. They're in mutual
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
quadrants, but they're not. It's
Mhm.
not a full
Mhm.
Tapasvi yoga. So that's just another thing, and these are all things that I've learned from the tradition.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so he also, this is happening during his Rahu Venus Vimshotri
Mhm.
dasha.
Mhm.
So that Tapasvi yoga is getting triggered, as well as Rahu is probably the strongest marka in his chart
Mhm. Mhm.
because the seventh house is a marka, and Rahu is a very malefic planet. So
Mhm.
again, that that's getting triggered. That very strong like death like suffering. So enlightenment
Mhm.
experiences are not fun. Is
Mhm.
what is one thing that I've you can see pretty clearly.
Mhm.
But like
Mhm.
some of these other people, UG Krishnamurti, I know he's a little controversial, but he also
Mhm.
has um this K2, Venus, and Saturn. In the D20, he has a toposophy. He has a toposophy yoga. Um, we can, and then Chidu Krishnamurti also has um, Venus, Saturn, K2. Where's that? He has another toposophy yoga in one of these. Venus and Saturn. Yeah, so this is by Rashi Drishti. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the other way we see it. They're either in trines
So
or they're in
this
Rashi
is
Drishti.
D9. You're looking into
D9. So
D9.
you can see the toposophy yoga either in the D1, the
Mm-hmm.
D9, or the D20. And that will
Mm-hmm.
show that strong. But there are other yogas too that show. But this was the
Mm-hmm.
one that popped up the most for me in this
Mm-hmm.
context. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I want to do
Yeah, the
is
here is
look.
also like one thing is like yoga is actually different from what is astrological yoga, which is actually different from the other yoga which we are talking about. That also, if we have to clarify here, because otherwise the people who will listen to this maybe get confused. Like like a certain
Yeah,
planetary combinations, maybe we can call it as a yoga, but in actual sense, the yoga means yogam, means the union with
yeah,
something. So yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So when I say yoga, yeah, I mean it's a
Yeah.
planetary combination
Mhm.
combination of planets.
Mhm.
And yeah, so different planetary combinations. I mean, that's like half of astrology, I think, in a way,
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
like all these
Mhm.
different planetary combinations
Mhm.
and what they're showing. So that
Mhm.
toposophy yoga of Venus, Saturn, and Ketu, either
Mhm.
in trines
Mhm.
or mutually aspecting by Rashi Drishti,
Mhm.
which is a sign-based aspect.
Mhm.
That shows that toposophy, that ability to do a lot of tapas or spiritual practice
Mhm.
strongly. Yeah.
The way which I drew the chart also is differ. Like you can actually
You
Google
use the
the
South Indian.
yeah, South Indian actually. This is North Indian chart which you have seen showed.
Yeah, so we can do that too. I I
Mhm.
mainly use I usually use the North Indian. Um,
Mm-hmm. The chart which I
so
use is the one which the in center that Om is printed, that South Indian point. That is the
this one,
thing which I yeah. That is called the South Indian chart. So that is the chart which I use mostly.
cool.
And the
Oh,
12th house, where like in the 12th house is also associated with the moksha. Yeah, that
mhm.
like in the D1 itself, like like we can see like something like that in the. And how do you see the yogas in the Western astrology?
In Western astrology, the yogas they're starting to be used more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so in traditional like Renaissance astrology, it's more aspect based by by like straight aspects. So like um there's a different understanding of aspects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because Western astrology, since the late classical period, basically didn't use whole sign houses, so maybe like
Mm-hmm.
Middle Ages, they started not using whole sign houses and they use um, quadrant houses mainly.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't see the planets as in the same house as much. I mean, you can see that, but it's more about how close of an aspect, an exact aspect they have. So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, um, Saturn and Sun, if they are within 1 degree of each other, that's a very, very strong
Mm-hmm.
conjunction. Or if they're
Mm-hmm.
within 1 degree of an opposition, or
Mm-hmm.
a trine, or a square,
Mm-hmm.
um, those are that's kind of how you see yogas more often
Mm-hmm.
in the Western context. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not really the same.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things about Vedic astrology that I
Let's
think is
say
really
one
powerful.
one kind of
Yeah.
yoga in Vedic astrology. Like can you name one yoga? Like let's say you understand what is Raja Yoga, right? Like the and some certain planetary combination will bring
Yeah,
the
yeah. It's very
yeah.
complicated though, because there can be so many different kinds of Raj Yoga.
Yeah.
Um,
So how do we see, like, it's also depends on the people's chart and his understanding.
yeah,
And how do we see this particular yoga? Can there be an equivalent in the Western astrology, Western version of the astrology? Or
yeah. So
I'm not trying to say the Raja Yoga per se, but something else. Like,
right,
yeah.
yeah. So for instance, like a Mahapurush Yoga.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I mean, you can see that in any Western chart too. You just have to have a planet in one of the angles
Mhm.
in their own sign or their exaltation.
Mhm.
So, if you have Jupiter on the midheaven, which is
Mhm.
like the MC, it's like what's exactly above, um,
Mhm.
in Cancer, then that could be considered a Mahapurush Yoga. But then it's in Cancer in the tropical system, so it's most often not going to be in Cancer in the sidereal. So it's not. I don't know if it really counts as a Mahapurush,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
But you could look at, like, so for instance, Jupiter K2 together. That's a combination that indicates a spiritual lineage.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you have Jupiter in the south node very closely conjunct in the Western system, I mean that can show a yoga for being in a spiritual lineage. But it is really, I feel like yogas are more of a whole sign house technique,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
And if you're using the quadrant houses and you're using more of these direct aspects,
Mhm.
it's not as it's it's not going to be used as much.
Mhm. Mhm.
Other things are going to be used. you know
Mhm.
Other
Mhm.
techniques are going to be used. I think that each kind of system has techniques that work better within that system, and you can't necessarily take those techniques out and use it in a system that it's not meant to be used in. So
Exactly.
I don't. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I'm like going too fast. Sometimes I just like I should slow down and like be kind of clear about what I'm trying to
Mhm.
say for
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
who don't aren't as well versed as you are in the astrological systems too. But the one thing that I was thinking about is that, so with aspects, for instance,
Mhm. Mhm.
they're different in Vedic astrology than in Western astrology.
Mhm.
So we have like special aspects for each planet that are by whole sign in Vedic
Mhm.
astrology. So like um, Mo- Venus and Mercury and the Sun and the Moon, they kind of only give seventh house aspects.
Mhm.
They aspect
Mhm.
everything in the seventh house. But Jupiter will aspect the fifth, the ninth, and the seventh.
Mhm.
And then Rahu will aspect the second, the fifth, the ninth, and the seventh. And
Mhm.
Saturn aspects the third, the seventh, and the 10th.
Mhm.
And then the Mars aspects the fourth, the seventh, and the eighth. So each planet has a different like full aspect on, and it's by whole sign house. But in Western astrology, generally each planet, there are all the different aspects are can be each planet can have each of the different aspects, but they have to
Mhm.
within orb, and the orb is how far it is from an exact conjunction or exact opposition or an exact square.
Mhm.
Um, and so like the opposition is that 1-7, but it has to be within usually like 8 degrees of
Mhm.
being exact,
Mhm. Mhm.
And so any planet can have that. Any planet can have a square aspect, and
Mhm.
that has to be, within that almost exact um, 90 degrees.
Mhm.
That's not, yeah. So, so it's a little bit different. Aspects are a little bit different, and again, I think partially that's because they're not using whole sign house as much,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know. And then there has been a since Hellenistic astrology has been making a resurgence over the last 10 years or so.
Mhm.
A lot of people are using whole sign, but they're not always using all the techniques
Mhm. Mhm.
that go with it,
Mhm.
because a lot of that has been lost.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, so yogas are harder to see in a way because they're more of a whole sign house
Mhm.
technique in my opinion.
Mhm. 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 Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. And also there is a problem which we can see, like, yeah, there is a problem we can see, like, the how the planet earth is actually existing, like, it will be like this, okay, and there is an axis, the earth
Hmm.
has an axis, and it has an 18-degree tilt, like, in Vedic astrology it has been there, so maybe is this affecting the calculation that is happening in the Western astrology, and how do you see about this, like, I mean.
Right. Yeah. So that if what I understand is correct, what you're saying, if I'm understanding what you're saying is correct. Yeah. So that's kind of the how the quadrant houses are
Mhm.
figured out,
Mhm.
because they're looking at the exact degree of the ascendant and the
Mhm.
descendant, and then they're calculating the exact midheaven
Mhm.
and then what's under the earth. So they're calculating those exact coordinates,
Mhm.
and then the houses are defined from them
Mhm.
instead of from the based on 30-degree
Mhm.
signs, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
So some and in the summer, especially in the northern hemisphere or the
Mhm.
southern hemisphere,
Mhm.
it's gonna like if you're closer to the poles, it's gonna
Mhm.
be major differences.
Mhm.
So like
Mhm. Mhm.
one house it could take you because on average in the tropics, going
Mhm.
through a whole sign house, it'll take you about 2 hours,
Mhm.
right, for a
Mhm.
sign.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it could take 5 hours
Mhm.
to go
Mhm.
through a sign in a
Mhm.
quadrant house
Mhm.
in Alaska,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
depending on if it's in the summer or it's in the winter, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's
Yeah, this is
I think
also
that
one important point to think of. Like, in India, we don't have the summer timing and winter timing. There is 5 hours difference in the summer. Like, AM will be become PM and PM will be become AM. Like, it's the 12-hour clock or 24-hour clock is not exactly going to work there. So this is also something like, some of my friends are talking about that. How does this suits? Like, this is also, I never experienced this thing in being in India. Like, so how do you
yeah.
manage that stuff? Like, I mean, in the Vedic astrology and Western astrology, how do you look into?
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things I've been thinking about as to why in the Western astrology, the tropical signs are used more,
Mhm,
and the quadrant houses are used more.
mhm,
Because if you're in England, for
mhm,
instance,
mhm, mhm,
you're a lot farther, you're a lot closer to the poles.
mhm,
So,
mhm,
and also the seasons are very different. There are like
mhm,
four distinct seasons,
mhm, mhm,
and so like the tropical system is seasonal. You know,
mhm,
it's based on
mhm,
spring, summer, fall, and winter,
mhm, mhm,
and those are very distinct. Whereas, if you're closer to the tropics, there are less. Maybe I mean, there's like monsoon season, and I haven't been in the tropics very often, so it's like I don't even really know. But
mhm,
um, from my understanding, there's less of a four season um kind of a thing. Like when I visit Florida, um,
mhm,
it's there may be more of a rainy season, more of a dry season,
mhm,
but it's not those distinct four seasons. So
mhm,
I think that's one reason that um, the tropical system is used, and one
mhm,
reason those quadrant houses are used because things do change so much in
mhm,
the in if you're closer to the poles.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
But I don't really know.
mhm.
Um, yeah,
So
that's
if
just
we like, if one planet, let's say Venus is in Taurus, in Vedic astrology. So if we look into the Western astrology, it will come to the Aries. If
yeah.
the because of the tilt, so the prediction also can change a lot. That's what I'm wondering. Like, how does it
Oh,
work?
you're talking about you're talking about the precession of the equinoxes, that
Yeah,
tilt.
yeah.
The tilt that's causing the precession of the equinoxes, right? And so my teacher Freedom Cole actually wrote a really interesting article about this. It's like
Mm-hmm,
something like the Great Divorce. It's
mm-hmm,
about how the two zodiac systems uh were together and then they separated
mm-hmm,
over the years too. So
mm-hmm,
yeah, um so what for people who don't know that there's this tilt to the earth and that causes the precession of the equinoxes. So
mm-hmm,
at one time, maybe I think it was about 200 AD,
mm-hmm,
the tropical zodiac, which is tied to the sky, it's the same 30-degree sections, but they're tied to the sky at the equinoxes and solstices.
mm-hmm,
And then the sidereal zodiac, which is tied to the sky at the fixed star Spica, for
mm-hmm,
most sidereal zodiacs. Um, it depends on how you calculate Spica,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because there's, and then that's why there's some difference between the different sidereal zodiacs. But uh, at around 200 AD, I believe it was 200 AD, they were the same. So Aries, tropical Aries, and sidereal Aries were the
mm-hmm,
same 30-degree section of the sky,
mm-hmm.
and so all the significations for the sidereal and the tropical were both in that same sign,
Mhm,
so they were
mhm,
married in a certain way.
mhm,
But because of that, the the precession of the
mhm,
equinoxes is that point is moving by 1 degree
mhm,
every 72 years.
mhm, mhm,
So over hundreds of years, we're now 23 point something degrees separate. or 24
Mhm.
degrees, between 23 and 24, depending on which
Mhm.
ionumsha you use, from the sidereal is about 23, 24 degrees different from the tropical.
Mhm.
So you can still have the moon in Aquarius in both, but it'll be at the end of one sign and the beginning of the other, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
in terms of interpretation, um, that's something that I'm exploring. I'm like
Mhm.
seeing how things happen too, because um, it seems like for me and from the tradition I'm learning in, like
Mhm.
freedom explains that uses different house system, like the Bava house
Mhm.
system, and there's some other ones too, and the whole sign house system with the sidereal zodiac shows what is,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what actually is, and then um, that more quadrant house you can see like what you are, how um your what is being distorted to a certain
Mhm.
degree too. The
Mhm.
more like how you're influenced by society and so on. And in terms of the tropical, there are some differences, but it's mainly the same system.
Mhm.
In terms of like what planets are exalted, where they're debilitated, where their own signs are. Um, and I use that to a high degree in like talisman making and like that kind of thing, because the manual that I use, the Picatrix, uses the tropical system.
Mhm.
Um, but I also in the Vedic system there are all these different divisional charts too,
Mhm.
and that's I
Mhm.
think one way to see the tropical zodiac as like another division,
Mhm.
another
Mhm.
layer that you
Mhm.
can layer on top. Um, but again, this is something I'm still experimenting with. And people
Mhm.
get very good results from tropical, but they're mainly using these kind of exact aspects,
Mhm.
and it's really useful psychologically for like
Mhm.
and seeing that how the mind distorts reality,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm. 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 That
Um,
is that is what the
but
my understanding is, like, most of the Western astrological version is actually how, most of it is related to the mind, how the mind
yeah,
is perceive the reality which is actually happening around, and how mind can work with this particular reality. This is what my understanding so far, what as far as I studied and understood, like, I mean, this is
yeah.
yeah. I mean, how
Well,
do you
so,
feel about,
so
like, I mean.
the modern Western astrology is very psychological.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
that's also one of the reasons that I studied the more traditional Renaissance and medieval
Mhm.
astrology, because it's
Mhm.
more predictive
Mhm.
and it's
Mhm.
more, it's more useful in that way, more
Mhm.
practical
Mhm.
in real world things. But that's the other thing that I think that like that tropical in Western astrology is better for seeing the mind and how the mind
Mhm.
distorts reality.
Mhm.
And the sidereal with the whole analysis, the Vedic system, is better for seeing what is and what's going wrong, and then being able to remedy that,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in terms of real world, like what's
Mhm.
actually happening
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
life. Whereas you can do a lot psychologically and other things with the Western. But
Mhm.
again, I'm still, the jury's still out for me. I'm still
Mhm.
experimenting and learning and seeing how these different zodiacs are interacting and how the different systems interact.
Mhm.
And
And
but
like,
yeah,
have you did any remedies in Vedic way in US, and how does it go? Like, is there something? Did you
yeah.
try
So
to do some remedy, and did it got any? How does that work actually? Like, I mean.
right. So I guess to start, in the tradition that I study within,
Mhm.
um, we primarily do remedy on three kinds of remedies.
Mhm.
So like mantra
Mhm.
practice,
Mhm.
um, donation,
Mhm.
and then like
Donation in the
yeah,
sense, giving
yeah,
offering to someone. Yeah.
right. So for instance, if you have a cursed Venus,
Mhm.
a heavily
Mhm.
afflicted Venus, you want to donate to women
Mhm.
who have
Mhm.
been like
Mhm.
young women who have been abused or
Mhm.
who are,
Mhm. Mhm.
suffering in some way. If
Mhm.
you have a cursed Mars, you
Mhm.
want to be offering to veterans.
Mhm.
If you have a
Mhm.
cursed moon, you want to be
Mhm.
offering donations to mothers.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, so that
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah,
behavior.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
then also, and then so we also recommend pujas or rituals. And
Mhm.
I've done a lot of ritual in a Western perspective, from like a Western
Mhm.
ceremonial. perspective. And actually, I did write a book. I should probably mention that. My background is also in Western ceremonial magic, which is a kind
Mhm,
of puja,
mhm,
you know.
mhm, mhm.
And I wrote this, The Heathen Golden Dawn. You can't really see it, but it's
Okay.
The Heathen Golden Dawn.
Mhm,
And this is a ceremonial magic from a Norse heathen perspective.
mhm,
And so there are all these you're using the deity forms, and that's
mhm,
that's another thing like the tradition that I study in. We
mhm,
use the deity forms
mhm,
for specific deity forms for for instance like using the avatars of Vishnu, like
mhm,
Rama is
mhm,
the sun,
mhm,
Krishna is the moon,
mhm,
and so on.
mhm,
And in the Norse system, we have
mhm,
Thor corresponds to Mercury. No,
mhm,
sorry, Thor corresponds to Jupiter. Odin corresponds to Mercury.
mhm,
Venus is Freya.
mhm,
We have all these other
mhm, mhm,
correspondences, and then there's a framework of ceremonial magic, like
mhm,
ritual
mhm,
work that you can do to invoke these different energies. And
mhm,
this
mhm,
comes from the Golden Dawn tradition,
mhm,
where you're doing different, like mostly hexagram rituals,
mhm,
as well as you can make like amulets and so on. And
mhm,
so this is one level. That's like the ritual level. But you can
mhm,
also hire a pujari who's highly
mhm,
skilled to
mhm,
do like and that will be in many ways much more potent. But then
mhm,
again, doing this kind of ritual for yourself can also be potent. And
mhm,
this is something that I did for years. This kind of work, this
mhm,
ritual work, I did for years before I even started studying Vedic astrology,
mhm,
you know?
mhm, mhm,
But so like I was remedying and balancing a lot of my planetary imbalances for
mhm,
these years by doing those rituals,
mhm,
you know?
mhm, mhm,
And so that's in one other thing that Freedom does is uses one of the great things about astrology is that the planets are the language of the gods.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And so there you can use them to read what the
mhm,
gods want, you know,
mhm, mhm,
um, but you can translate that into different cultural contexts as well.
mhm, mhm,
So that Mercury can be Buddha as
mhm,
a incarnation of Vishnu in that
mhm,
that context.
mhm,
It could be Odin in the Norse system. It could be Hermes in a
mhm,
Greek, and then there are, it could be Raphael in a
mhm, mhm,
Catholic.
mhm, mhm,
So translating that to whatever spiritual tradition that the person is working within
mhm,
is
mhm,
important too.
mhm,
So that's yeah. So there's that ritual aspect, which there are a lot of ways to do that.
mhm,
There's that donation aspect, and then there's the
mhm,
mantra aspect
mhm,
too. And for mantras too, like if you are Jewish, there are all these different prayers that you
mhm,
can do,
mhm,
like in
mhm,
Hebrew, right?
mhm,
And those finding the right mantra for
mhm,
that,
mhm,
the right Hebrew prayer,
mhm,
you can do that.
mhm,
Um, but there's already this whole system of correspondences
mhm,
um, with the correct mantras and so on.
mhm.
So uh,
So how
that's
does
that's
it
that's
worked out? Like, what was the result?
yeah. So for me,
Like, for example, when I'm trying to say this, like, if there is a naga dosha, like,
yeah,
if we figure
yeah,
out a serpent dosha, like there is a
yeah,
problem with the serpent in the particular chart, so it
yeah,
is easy for a person to go to a temple where the serpent deity is being worshipped in India, because there are many
yeah,
temples in many places in many deities. But
right.
how does it work in the Western framework? Because I guess that there are not this many temples. What you can see in the India, it is not available there anyway. Like, I mean.
Right. Yeah. And so that's some of the work that Freedom is doing and that I'm learning to do as well is to
Mhm,
translate that and see like one of the things that Freedom recommends is for especially with a Naga dosha, and we can see the Naga doshas in several different ways. If you have a Naga dosha in a fixed sign,
mhm,
where it's a Naga Badaka dosha,
mhm,
which shows there's an unseen obstacle, and it shows that the sarpas are mad at you.
mhm, mhm,
um, and if it's this the inferior serpents, and there are several different layers, You can see the superior serpent,
Yeah, there are
you
male
see,
serpent, female serpent, and
yeah.
serpent that is actually guarding the, what to say, the gold. In some places, the serpents will be guarding the gold. We can actually, there are multiple layers of serpents. Yes. Yeah.
So what he recommends to do is, especially in certain circumstances, to donate to do reforestation, like donate to
Mm-hmm.
Arbor Day,
Mm-hmm.
because he sees the Sarpas as nature spirits who protect the land.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a Nagadosha, that's probably because you cut down a sacred grove in a past life, or it could,
Mm-hmm.
you in a past life you clear cut a bunch of forest, and so the
Mm-hmm.
Sarpas are mad at you in this life. So
Mm-hmm.
you donate to do reforestation projects.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's in like a water sign and Jupiter's involved, you could donate to whales and
Mm-hmm.
whale habitat,
Mm-hmm.
to protect the
Mm-hmm.
whales. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one way
Mm-hmm.
that in this tradition, especially freedom's teachings,
Mm-hmm.
that we translate that into in Western practice.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also like still do like hire a pujari to do a naga
Mm-hmm.
dosha puja or some
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And also, like, if you look into the nakshatras in India, there are 27 nakshatras, and each
yeah,
nakshatra has one plant associated with that. Like, these
uh-huh,
plants are actually available in India only. This cannot grow. I
yeah,
don't know whether it can grow in the American soil or no. I am not so sure. Also, these 27 nakshatras has 27 animals. Each one will be having one animal. So the like, if like it can be in a certain way, we can visualize in this particular way also, like, if you feel the energy of a particular plant, or if you feel the energy of a particular animal, that is in resonate with the energy that you are vibrating from your body. So this can actually heal you and the surrounding around you, and this can give you more experience in the spiritual way and stuffs like that, like, so how I'm trying to visualize this, how does it can happen in the Western world, like how does it will happen, like, for example, because these animals and these trees cannot be present in the may not be there in the America per se, like,
yeah.
let's say America, like.
Right. So there's a few levels to this, and one level is that we also do live in a world where I can speak to you.
Mhm.
You're in India, I'm in the U.S., so
Mhm.
we can order things,
Mhm.
online and
Mhm.
get them from all over the world. So there's a very interconnected world at this point. So you can get some of those same plants, but you
Mhm.
can't grow them. They don't do well in this northern soil,
Mhm.
in this northern temperate
Mhm.
climate.
Mhm.
And I actually even run to that in the same way with a lot of the European herbs,
Mhm.
because some of the European herbs don't grow here. And like,
Mhm.
so there is this tradition of astrological herbalism
Mhm.
in the West. Like
Mhm.
Nicholas Culpeper, he was
Mhm.
a 17th century, 16th century,
Mhm.
17th century astrologer and herbalist, and
Mhm.
he wrote one of the most famous books on
Mhm.
herbalism,
Mhm.
Culpeper's
Mhm.
Complete Herbal,
Mhm.
and The English Physician.
Mhm.
And that book has been stayed in print for all these hundreds of years.
Mhm.
But he has all these correspondences between planets and plants
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
herbs.
Mhm.
And some of those plants, they don't really grow here
Mhm.
in the U.S. But
Mhm.
we have all these other plants that do grow here. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of work to be done,
Mhm.
for American herbalists and astrologers to find the correspondences and see,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
what they actually correspond to,
Mhm.
and then how to utilize that,
Mhm.
um, in remedies.
Mhm.
And I've done a lot more with planets than with
Mhm.
nakshatras,
Mhm.
though we do have some plants from the Arabic uh,
Mhm.
lunar mansions. There are some
Mhm.
correspondences, but then again, most of those plants
Mhm.
don't grow around here either.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, but with the planets, it's a lot. It's easier to see like the solar qualities of a plant.
Mhm.
If it has a bright yellow flower, you
Mhm.
know, if it destroys, if it's like antiseptic, if it destroys
Mhm.
disease, that's very
Mhm.
solar quality.
Mhm.
So things like things that don't grow in, like, I'm looking out my window right now and seeing
Mhm.
um a Rudbeckia laccionata, which is a cut leaf cut leaf coneflower. It has a bright yellow flower. It's
Mhm.
very tall. It's
Mhm.
very cheerful.
Mhm.
Um, it and that's that. There's a solar quality to that plant, so I can use
Mhm.
that in solar sun
Mhm.
sun remedies. If
Mhm.
you're making a herbal uh amulet, you know.
Mhm.
But you
Mhm.
also have a lists of like um magical herbalism and like
Mhm.
what herb uh works for different things. So like
Mhm.
chamomile is
Mhm.
a good protective plant, but it's also herbally
Mhm.
calming. And
Mhm.
that's another solar plant. So that's one you can use. Angelica is
Mhm.
very powerful as a ward against evil. It destroys evil. It destroys curses and hexes, and that's another
Mhm.
solar plant.
Mhm.
So like combining these plants in different ways, um, on the day of this on Sunday, when the sun is rising or in the midheaven,
Mhm. Mhm.
when the sun is in a strong sign,
Mhm.
that's a great way to do some what we call natural magic, and
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
another form of remediation that was more from a Western context too.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I do explore this. I did a presentation for Astromagia, which is a conference on astrological magic, and it's
Mhm.
on my YouTube, on the
Mhm.
Plant Cunning YouTube. It's
Mhm.
called Secrets of the English Astrological Herbalists,
Mhm. Mhm.
and there that goes into a lot of that
Mhm.
theory and
Mhm.
practice too.
Mhm.
But there are some other really good books
I
on that
think
kind of thing.
this would be an interesting talk to have actually. Like
Yeah.
I like to see the astrology in this particular way also. Like it is a way to protect nature as well. Like
Hmm.
you if you find that there is a particular plant, like most of the peoples right now, they won't even come out from their home, or they won't even come out from the place where they are, like when they are going for the work, they use a car or a bike
Hmm.
to go there to their work, and the flat will be in second floor or third floor or fourth floor, and they are really disconnected from the uh, in as a human. They are really disconnected, like. But if we look into the shamanism and animism and things like that,
Hmm.
you become the essence of that particular plant or particular animal,
Hmm.
like in shamanic healing or whatever we look into. So if we look into the Vedic astrology, there is an aspect of, like Ashuti, the first nakshatra, which is related to so and so plants and so animals. So this is a kind of animism and shamanism, which I would love to say. So this could be an interesting talk. Maybe we can have later on, like this particular
Yeah.
nakshatra has this particular plant, and how do you relate that from the Western perspective? That how we can, like how it is actually related to the Western ideology or Western
Yeah.
design of the human being, because human beings are the mind is also I mean, it is actually I mean, the way we think each other is different, but even though we are uniting with some truth, or we are seeking some truth in the life of existence, even though, like so I mean, yeah. So how do you see about that? I mean.
Well, yeah, that's definitely something that I want to explore and learn about more because
Mhm,
I'm not as familiar even with the nakshatras and the plants that
mhm,
correspond to them. It's not
mhm,
something that I've studied in depth yet, but
mhm,
I'm very interested in doing at
mhm,
some point soon. And maybe like I could have you on my show and we could talk about that.
mhm,
That'd be fun.
mhm,
Um, but that's definitely something I want to explore more. And it's something that will take a lot of experimentation
mhm,
on the part of people like me who are like living with the plants in the U.S. and
mhm,
are learning this systems to be able to make those correspondences. And I
mhm,
think that part of that is um, understanding the essence of like the nakshatras, and
mhm,
then seeing what plants uh, um, correspond to that,
mhm,
but also
mhm,
like what the essence of the nakshatra is and what the essence of the plant is that's corresponding to that, and see
mhm.
what if there's another plant in my context that does a lot of the same things,
Or maybe
so
this particular plant can grow in the US. We never know. I don't know. I mean.
yeah. Well, I do grow like ashwagandha in our
Mhm,
hoop
mhm,
house.
mhm, mhm,
Oh, and we do grow some other things, tulsi,
Uh-huh. Tulsi grows in the US.
There's a particular variety of it. It's
Mm-hmm.
more of a herbaceous, like fast growing one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think they call it Krishna. Not no, I
Mm-hmm.
forget what or yeah, I'm not sure what the exact name of it is, but it's not any. It's like a smaller one. It smells like tutti frutti bubble gum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we grow that, and that does really well in this climate. And it's more of an
Mm-hmm.
annual. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
you reseed it every year.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those are two herbs that I do grow, and they we can grow them as an annual, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
grow year after. You have to keep growing them every spring. Because they
The
die
seed
in the
won't
winter.
grow, like the seeds will.
They'll die in the winter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can
So the
replant
seeds,
the seeds? No, not possible.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So I start them from seed every spring, and then
Mm-hmm.
they grow all summer, and then we harvest them in the fall, and
Mm-hmm.
then we grow them again in the spring. So
The kind
they
of
can't last the winter here.
tactical permaculture.
Yeah, yeah. So they're not permanent. They're not perennial, but we have a lot of other plants that are perennial. And we have a lot
Mhm.
of. I've got so many plants here. There's
Okay.
a lot of yeah. But that's definitely something I'm very interested in doing of trying to. So the one aspect is like seeing from an analytical perspective
Mhm.
what could be the good correspondences, and then on the other
Mhm.
perspective, doing the experimentation and seeing what works.
Mhm. Mhm. Exactly. And so you want to say something over here? Anything which I didn't cover?
Oh yeah. So if you're hearing this and you aren't familiar with my podcast, we talk about plants, magic, spirituality, astrology on the
Mhm.
Plant Cunning podcast, and that's available on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those things. And I'm also starting a new YouTube channel where I'm focusing more on astrology and
Mhm.
spirituality specifically, called Ask Isaac. So that should be up soon. I'm going to be doing a more in-depth presentation on um, my research into spiritual experiences and spiritual practitioners and enlightenment and this kind of stuff. I'm going to be doing some videos on that. So look for that if you're interested. And then if you do want to, am doing consultations. I'm doing them by donation currently. So you can
Mhm.
email me at info@plantcunning.com if you're
Mhm.
interested in scheduling one of those.
Mhm.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you for having me on the show, and this has been
Yeah, thank
fun.
you.
I
It's
hope I
been
didn't like,
nice. Yeah, it's a really good, like, it's really good to see how two peoples will reflect on the same thing from two different understanding about life, you see. Like, I mean,
yeah.
of course, we growed up in different places, even though I have the long hair, like, the long hair which you do.
Yeah.
And something similar to like this. You see, but
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So anyway, uh, so yeah, thank you for being on the show, and I think we can talk about the plans of nakshatra and how does it work in a very detailed way very soon. I feel like
Yeah, that'd be great.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you again.
yeah. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.